These days, the Chilterns is a place I call home. Its mixture of beautiful vistas and broadleaf woodland is something truly special.
Well, what you can see is stunning, but what you can't see is perhaps even more remarkable. This area is littered with sites of archaeological importance. There's the remains of more than 20 hill forts spread out across this tranquil landscape. And it's believed there are even more waiting to be discovered.
But searching for ancient ruins hidden under dense forests which cover huge areas can prove a tricky task. Archaeologist Dr. Wendy Morrison is leading a new project using the latest technology combined with people power to help change all that.
So now we're actually inside the Iron Age enclosure and we're coming up on the outer ditch of it. This is the bank upon which there probably was a wooden fence.
And would there have been like a house and what have you in here?
There would have been houses, probably grain storage inside this enclosure.
When you know what was here, you can sort of feel something, can't you? It's so exciting.
And the amazing part about the Chilterns is that it's absolutely stuffed with sites like this. And that's what the LiDAR's helped us to discover.
Wendy reported this find to the Historic Environment Agency, meaning it's now protected. But there are worries about the preservation of other ancient sites in this area, as the wider Chilterns landscape faces major disruption.
So with all of this in mind then, and thinking ahead for HS2, if you don't know what's there yet, are you concerned about what HS2 is going to cut through?
Absolutely. HS2 is a huge threat to the historic environment. I mean, we've seen a lot of archaeological discoveries in the path of HS2 over the last year and a half. To be honest, it would be much better if HS2 was not being constructed in an area of such significance.
Hopefully, with the help of citizen scientists, many more sites might be unearthed and preserved in the face of progress.
It's clear that this landscape is going to be dramatically changed by HS2. And it's not alone, because many other parts of the UK countryside are going to be transformed by this and other big infrastructure projects designed to drive our economic recovery. But can the government deliver on its promise to make this a green recovery? Here's Joe.
Another lockdown, and the true value of our countryside and outdoor spaces is again clear to all. But there's also an economic crisis which needs a clear pathway out. And for some, the answer is to build.
And that means sinking billions of pounds into major infrastructure projects to jumpstart the UK economy.
Let's get the economic picture from our economics editor, Stephanie Flanders.
I have to say, Evan, I don't know if you found it different, but I found it quite hard to find an economist who thought it was a great idea.
It's well known it's based on questionable assumptions, such as business travellers don't work on the train and so on. The point is, the main point is if this money was spent on high return transport investments, then the payoffs could be an awful lot greater, probably by a factor of 4 or 5. So really, it isn't the best value for money, for taxpayers' money. It's very poor value for money investment.
But the government has also vowed this will be a green economic recovery, one that puts environmental gains at its heart.
So how do you square that desire to reverse the declines in biodiversity and protect the land, air and water around us with this need to build, and build big?
This is one of the largest construction sites so far for the HS2 rail link. Billed as the biggest infrastructure project in Europe, the first phase of this high-speed rail link will plough its way through 140 miles of countryside from London to the West Midlands, with later phases taking it on to Leeds and Manchester. It's been highlighted as the low-carbon future for mass transportation. But thanks to the pandemic, more and more people are working from home. So is this really the sort of infrastructure project we should be ploughing our money into? COVID restrictions even stopped HS2's boss Mark Thurston from travelling to meet me today.
Mark, it seems the pandemic has changed everything. The fact that we're not actually here in person together today, we're talking to each other over the internet. Do we need to reappraise HS2 in light of that? Will we still need it in the same way?
You know, the expectations that people will want to travel again, travel between the major cities, particularly in the Midlands and the North, where connectivity isn't anywhere near as good as it is in London, the South East. It's going to be crucial to that, you know, economic rebalancing that's so essential to a sort of British economy going forward.
The claim that HS2 will heal the North-South divide is a massive overstatement. If we look at what's happened in other countries, Spain, France, South Korea, where these kinds of high-speed lines have been introduced, that simply hasn't happened. What's more likely to happen is that it will attract further people to work in London from an even wider distance, and it will enable firms in London to serve markets in the regions much more easily. So most of the advantages of this investment will accrue to London and the South East rather than to the regional cities.
But this is a project that's divided opinion, not least because of its feared environmental impact, which many claim already undermines the government's professed green ambitions.
And people have been quick to point out the impact they believe HS2 is already having.
Here at South Covington Wood in Warwickshire, trees are being felled to make way for the rail link. Campaigners' footage captures the moment the 200-year-old Covington pear tree, a former Tree of the Year, is felled.
There you go. That's how you take down a Covington pear tree.
Campaigners say the felling of trees along the HS2 route sums up the contradiction in national policy.
On one hand, the government is committed to new tree planting to alleviate climate change, and on the other, it stands accused of allowing mature trees and even ancient woodland to be destroyed for HS2.
It's predicted that at least 108 ancient woods along the full length of HS2 will be lost or damaged as a result. And that's not all. Campaigners say it will destroy or have a significant impact on 5 wildlife refuges of international importance, 693 classified local wildlife sites, 18 Wildlife Trust nature reserves, and 38 sites of special scientific interest. Calvert Jubilee Nature Reserve in Buckinghamshire is a good place to spot wintering wildfowl. And visiting here as a local youngster gave the reserve's manager, Mark Vallance, his passion for nature.
It's where I got my first sighting of a nightingale as a teenager. It's
wow.
An amazingly special kind of moment for me.
And that's still with you today, is it, that moment?
Very much still with me today, yeah. I've got some really special moments of this nature reserve.
Thickets of mature blackthorn, vital habitat for the reserve's rare black hair-streaked butterfly, have been removed by HS2 as they cleared all the land on the other side of this temporary steel fence.
And why is blackthorn, and importantly mature blackthorn, so significant?
It's critical in the life cycle of black hair-streaked butterflies. They need mature blackthorn as part of their life cycle, so they lay their eggs and the larvae will feed on the blackthorn. So sites like this are critically important to that species hanging on in this threatened kind of environment that we find ourselves in.
Environmental groups want HS2 to create what's called a net gain, meaning nature wouldn't lose out from development but would actually benefit from more flora, fauna and new habitat created elsewhere. But instead of net gain, the government simply says there will be no net loss. It also says only a small amount of ancient woodland is affected by HS2. And its CEO, Mark Thurston, says they're not just creating a rail link along the spine of the country, but a green corridor too.
So the idea is it will reduce carbon. Clearly, it costs quite a lot of carbon to build a project like this. When will it become carbon neutral? At which point in the future, do you think?
Well, that will certainly depend on the volume of services that run once the railway's been built. But I think what we're very aware of as part of the commitment of HS2 is for it to be a net zero project. So we've put a massive green corridor programme and make sure we reinvest in the natural environment to offset that carbon you referred to. And if you think about the tunnel you're stood behind there at Long Itchington, that's to avoid damaging an ancient woodland. We've already planted over 400,000 trees on HS2. I think that number will be about 700,000 by the spring. And just between London and Birmingham, we're going to plant around 7 million trees and shrubs to create this green corridor So the final railway is very sympathetic to and blends in with the natural environment.
But there are some habitats, some environments that can't be replaced. That's what the Wildlife Trust would say, that actually some things you can't mitigate for. There will be damage, there will be a cost.
Where we are impacting on the natural environment, we're translocating species. We're going to create 60 new habitats. In fact, the planting area for trees and shrubs on HS2 is 30% greater than the area that's impacted by the railway. So our intent is that the sort of net effect of all our work in this area ultimately enhances the natural environment.
There is huge damage to the environment from this plan for HS2. And the idea that you can plant some trees and that's a replacement, an offset for an ancient woodland, simply does not stack up.
But of course, HS2 is far from the only transport project the government is hoping will drive economic recovery. It's also launched a £27 billion plan to modernise our road network, even if that means tunnelling past an ancient monument like Stonehenge.
So how does all this building sit with the government's promises of a green recovery?
Dr. Richard Benwell is the Chief Executive of Wildlife and Countryside Link, England's largest environment and wildlife coalition.
Richard, this dual drive to have major infrastructure projects but also a green recovery, are these two things compatible?
Of course, we realise that sometimes infrastructure needs to go ahead. And where there's absolutely no avoiding harm, there should be a cast iron legal guarantee that developers are required not just to make good the harm they cause, but to go further and to invest in restoring nature. The government is talking about this in its environment bill, but it's leaving an exemption for major infrastructure projects. That's a loophole that should be immediately closed when the bill returns to Parliament.
The government insists benefiting the environment is a key part of its future recovery plans. It told us that it's working to identify the best way to deliver biodiversity net gain for major infrastructure projects and will be consulting on further details in due course. With 2.6 million people expected to be out of work by the middle of the year, we're going to need jobs and to rebuild our economy. But at what price to the environment?
One thing this pandemic has given us is time to reflect, not least on how we shape society coming out of this crisis. And there's been plenty of talk of building back better. But when it comes to major infrastructure projects, is it enough simply to offset the environmental harm being done? Or is it finally time to do more and to take bolder action before it's too late?
I'll finish with a simple statement. Don't go for greenwash, which the arguments being made for HS2 are. Let's go for the local and regional cross-country, non-London focused transport improvements that we need to have. That's what we need to choose.